Did you know the UK is just one crisis away from collapse? The economy is teetering on the edge, inflation is through the roof, and more people are living in poverty than ever before. Energy shortages are looming, and the NHS is on the brink of collapse, struggling to cope with skyrocketing demand. Meanwhile, housing prices are out of control, pushing home ownership further out of reach. As political divides grow wider, social unrest is simmering beneath the surface. But that's not all. The UK faces a growing environmental crisis that could devastate entire communities. What's going on behind the scenes, and how close are we to a breaking point? Let's dive into the shocking truths you won't hear anywhere else. Number 10. Environmental risks. The UK is increasingly vulnerable to environmental risks, with climate change posing a significant threat to its infrastructure, economy, and way of life. Severe weather events, such as floods, storms, and heat waves, are becoming more frequent and intense, causing widespread damage to homes, businesses, and public services. The flooding of key areas, especially in coastal and river regions, disrupts local communities and puts immense pressure on emergency services and the government. The UK's infrastructure, which was built for more stable weather patterns, is struggling to cope with the intensity of these events. As the climate crisis deepens, the economic cost of these environmental disasters is expected to grow, impacting insurance premiums, property values, and agricultural productivity. Additionally, the UK is facing growing concerns over air pollution and biodiversity loss. Cities like London experience high levels of pollution, which contribute to respiratory diseases and strain the NHS. Despite efforts to improve air quality and promote green energy, progress has been slow, and the overall environmental policies still fall short of what is needed to meet climate goals. The loss of biodiversity, with species disappearing from local ecosystems, reduces the natural resilience of the environment, making it harder to recover from environmental damage. The UK's environmental preparedness is also lacking. While there have been some initiatives aimed at reducing carbon emissions and increasing sustainable practices, the country is still heavily reliant on fossil fuels, and efforts to transition to renewable energy sources have been inconsistent. Failure to invest in green infrastructure and climate adaptation measures will leave the UK ill-equipped to handle the impacts of climate change. As extreme weather and environmental disruptions become more common, the country's future stability will hinge on how well it can address these growing environmental risks. Number 9. Global challenges and Brexit fallout. The UK's decision to leave the European Union has triggered a series of global challenges that continue to reverberate through its economy and diplomatic relations. The long-term effects of Brexit have become increasingly apparent, with significant disruptions in trade, security, and diplomacy. One of the most immediate consequences has been the trade barriers that now exist between the UK and the EU. Businesses face increased tariffs, customs delays, and complex paperwork, making it more difficult and costly to do business with European countries. This has particularly hit industries that rely on cross-border supply chains, such as manufacturing and agriculture. Brexit has also had a significant impact on the UK's global standing. With the loss of access to the EU single market, the UK has had to forge new trade agreements and establish its own international relationship. While the government has pursued new deals with countries like the United States and Australia, the economic benefits have been underwhelming compared to what was lost in Europe. The UK's global isolation is becoming more evident as it struggles to adapt to a new geopolitical landscape. Meanwhile, trade disruptions and economic uncertainty continue to undermine the country's financial stability. The impact of Brexit is not limited to economics alone. Security and diplomacy have also been affected. The UK no longer has the same level of access to EU intelligence networks and collaborative security measures, making it more vulnerable to threats. The loss of freedom of movement within the EU has also led to staffing shortages in critical sectors, such as healthcare and hospitality, where workers from the EU were once in abundance. The ongoing fallout from Brexit highlights the need for careful consideration of its long-term consequences, as the UK faces an increasingly uncertain future in the global arena. Number 8. Declining public trust. The UK is experiencing a decline in public trust across its institutions, particularly in government and public services. This erosion of trust is a major contributor to the country's broader instability. Political scandals, unfulfilled promises, and perceived corruption have led many citizens to feel that their voices are ignored by those in power. A growing sense of disillusionment is evident, as people no longer believe that the political system works in their best interests. This widespread mistrust has resulted in an apathetic public, with many feeling powerless and disengaged from the decision-making processes that directly impact their lives. The media also plays a role in shaping public perception, fueling division and skepticism. Constantly reporting on scandals and failures, rather than achievements, has created an atmosphere of negativity and cynicism. As trust in government and institutions dwindles, it becomes harder to build consensus around vital national issues, from economic policies to health reform. This disconnect between the public and the government leads to a lack of accountability and slows the decision-making process, further complicating the nation's ability to solve critical problems. Moreover, the decline in public trust also undermines the effectiveness of public services like the NHS and police force, which rely on the confidence and cooperation of the public to function optimally. Without trust in these institutions, people are less likely to engage with them, whether it's seeking medical care or reporting crimes. This breakdown of trust weakens the social fabric and exacerbates existing problems within society. If the UK is to move forward and overcome its challenges, restoring public trust in its institutions must become a top priority for policymakers and leaders. Number 7. Housing crisis. The UK's housing crisis is one of the most pressing issues affecting citizens, with soaring property prices making home ownership increasingly out of reach for many. Over the past few decades, the cost of buying a home has risen far faster than wages, creating a situation where home ownership is no longer a realistic goal for younger generations. The lack of affordable housing is exacerbating wealth inequality, as those who already own property continue to benefit from rising house prices, while those trying to enter the housing market are left behind. This has led to a growing divide between property owners and renters, with many feeling locked out of a fundamental aspect of financial security. Renting has also become a growing challenge, with rents reaching unsustainable levels, especially in major cities like London. This has left many people in a perpetual state of housing instability, as they struggle to afford rent while saving for a future home. For those in lower income brackets, the dream of home ownership seems increasingly unattainable. Meanwhile, the lack of affordable rental options has led to overcrowded living conditions, with many families forced to live in substandard properties that do not meet their needs. The housing supply simply isn't meeting demand, leaving millions without adequate shelter. The housing crisis is also impacting the economy, as young people are forced to delay major life milestones like starting a family or setting up a business because they cannot secure stable housing. This creates a drag on social mobility and economic growth, as the lack of affordable housing limits people's ability to thrive. If this crisis continues without significant intervention, it will lead to even more social instability, further divide communities, and exacerbate inequality across the country. Urgent reforms are needed to address this issue before it spirals further out of control. Number 6. Health system strain. The NHS is at breaking point, facing a severe strain that threatens its ability to provide essential healthcare to the UK's population. Long-standing issues such as underfunding, staff shortages, and overworked healthcare professionals have combined to create a crisis that is putting lives at risk. Waiting times for treatments are at an all-time high, with many patients facing delays of months or even years for necessary procedures. This growing backlog is not only affecting those in need of elective surgeries, but is also worsening the condition of people who can't receive timely care for urgent health problems. The NHS, once considered a national treasure, is becoming increasingly overburdened, and the standard of care is slipping. The healthcare workforce is also facing immense pressure, with doctors and nurses working longer hours and enduring higher levels of stress. This burnout is leading to a rise in staff shortages, as more healthcare professionals leave the system or reduce their working hours due to the overwhelming demands. The lack of adequate support for healthcare workers is creating a vicious cycle, where fewer staff members are available to meet the needs of an ever-growing patient base. This shortage of staff directly impacts the quality of care, leading to errors and a lack of personal attention for patients. In addition to staffing issues, rising healthcare costs and a failure to invest in preventative care have placed further pressure on the NHS. With an aging population, the demand for healthcare is rising, but the system's ability to meet these needs is rapidly diminishing. Without significant reform, the UK's health system risks collapsing entirely, leaving millions without access to the care they need. The strain on the NHS highlights the urgent need for a comprehensive plan to restore its ability to serve the population and ensure that healthcare remains accessible to all. Number 5. Education system decline. The UK's education system is facing a significant decline, which poses a serious threat to the future of its citizens. Over the past decade, funding cuts have strained schools across the country, leading to overcrowded classrooms, underpaid teachers, and a shortage of vital educational resources. As a result, students are receiving a lower standard of education, with many falling behind in crucial subjects like maths, science, and literacy. The widening educational gap between wealthier and poorer areas has made it even harder for disadvantaged students to access the opportunities they need to succeed. In addition to underfunding, the education system is struggling with increasingly outdated curricula that fail to equip students with the skills needed to thrive in a rapidly changing job market. Digital literacy, for example, has become a key area of concern, with many students lacking essential technical skills that are now required in almost every industry. The system's inability to keep up with the demands of the modern world means that the UK risks falling behind other countries in terms of workforce readiness. As global competition intensifies, the UK's future economic prosperity depends on having a highly skilled and adaptable workforce. This educational decline is also leading to mental health issues among students. The pressure of exam results, coupled with the lack of support and resources, has contributed to rising rates of stress and anxiety among young people. With the education system failing to provide adequate support for mental well-being, the next generation is at risk of inheriting a future that doesn't equip them to face the challenges of a complex, competitive world. Without urgent reform, the UK's education system will continue to deteriorate, leaving millions of students ill-prepared for the future. Number 4. Political polarization. The UK is grappling with a severe political polarization that has fractured society and made it more difficult for the government to address the country's pressing issues. The divide between political parties has grown increasingly wide, with extremist views gaining traction on both ends of the spectrum. This division has created an atmosphere where compromise is rare and political gridlock is common. Citizens feel as though their voices are ignored, as politicians focus more on attacking the opposition rather than working together to find solutions. This toxic political climate has led to widespread frustration and apathy among voters. The rise of populist movements has only deepened this divide. Leaders who capitalize on anger and fear often focus on polarizing issues, further driving a wedge between different groups in society. This creates a dangerous feedback loop, where extreme rhetoric dominates political discourse and meaningful conversation is drowned out. As disillusionment grows, fewer people trust mainstream political parties, which in turn allows fringe elements to flourish. The result is a political environment where it's increasingly difficult to enact policies that reflect the will of the people. This political fragmentation also hinders effective governance. As party lines become more entrenched, cooperation between different factions becomes nearly impossible. Major issues, such as the economy, housing, and healthcare, remain unaddressed as politicians bicker and fight over ideologies, rather than working together for the good of the country. The inability to unite behind a common cause weakens the UK's ability to respond effectively to the growing crises it faces. As the political divide widens, the country becomes more vulnerable to instability and unrest, with a government unable to take meaningful action in a time of urgent need. Number 3. Social inequality. Social inequality in the UK is a growing problem that exacerbates many of the nation's other issues. The gap between the rich and the poor has reached alarming levels, with an increasing number of individuals and families living below the poverty line. As the wealthy elite continue to accumulate wealth, millions struggle to make ends meet. The cost of living crisis, including rising food and housing prices, is pushing more people into financial hardship. Food banks are now a common sight across the UK, providing essential support for families who can't afford basic necessities. This stark disparity fuels discontent and makes it harder to foster a sense of unity within society. One of the most worrying aspects of this inequality is its impact on social mobility. Many individuals, especially those from disadvantaged backgrounds, find themselves stuck in a cycle of poverty with limited opportunities to improve their lives. The education system, though intended to be a ladder to success, has become increasingly unequal, with underfunded schools and poor educational outcomes in deprived areas. This lack of opportunity leads to frustration and a sense of hopelessness among younger generations. The increasing divide between the haves and the have-nots threatens the social fabric, creating an environment ripe for social unrest. Moreover, the growing inequality is directly linked to poor health outcomes in disadvantaged communities. Access to quality healthcare, adequate housing, and healthy food is often limited for lower-income groups, leading to a widening health gap. The government's inability to address these systemic issues means that many people feel abandoned and disillusioned, deepening social divides. This inequality is not just a moral issue, it's a fundamental threat to the stability and unity of the nation. The longer it persists, the closer the UK moves toward deeper social fractures that may be impossible to mend. Number 2. Energy crisis. The UK's energy crisis is one of the most pressing issues contributing to the nation's instability. The country's reliance on imported energy leaves it vulnerable to external disruptions. Geopolitical tensions, especially with energy-producing countries, have led to volatile energy prices that fluctuate wildly. As a result, households and businesses are feeling the strain of higher energy costs. With global energy markets in turmoil, the UK faces the risk of energy shortages, which could have devastating effects on the economy and daily life. As energy bills skyrocket, many struggle to keep their homes warm and businesses stay afloat. Despite efforts to transition to renewable energy, progress has been slow, and the UK is still highly dependent on fossil fuels. Government policies around energy security have been inconsistent, leaving the country ill-prepared for long-term sustainability. Renewable energy projects have faced delays, and the push for energy independence has not been as aggressive as it needs to be. As climate change accelerates, there's an urgent need for green energy solutions to mitigate future crises. However, without significant investment in clean energy infrastructure, the UK's energy vulnerability will only increase. The strain on the energy sector is also affecting critical services like hospitals, schools, and public transportation, which rely heavily on stable energy supply. A failure to address this energy crisis could result in widespread power outages, impacting the lives of millions. With the growing threat of climate change and international supply chain disruptions, the UK must urgently rethink its energy strategy to ensure it remains resilient in the face of future challenges. Number 1. Economic instability. The UK is facing unprecedented economic instability. Rising inflation and a soaring national debt have left the country teetering on the brink of financial collapse. The cost of living has skyrocketed, making it increasingly difficult for families to meet basic needs. Wages, however, have largely remained stagnant, pushing many people into financial strain. This growing economic disparity is threatening to spiral out of control. The government's debt has hit new heights, creating an unsustainable situation. With interest rates climbing, the financial burden on households and businesses becomes even heavier, making economic recovery more challenging. Meanwhile, government policies aimed at stabilizing the economy seem to fall short, with many experts arguing that the country lacks a comprehensive strategy to address these issues. The government's response has been slow and reactive, rather than proactive, leaving the economy vulnerable to further shocks. For instance, businesses are struggling to cope with rising operational costs, and the consumer market is being severely impacted. People are cutting back on spending, which is hindering growth and putting pressure on local businesses that are already on the edge. This ripple effect impacts all sectors of the economy, from retail to manufacturing, and even the housing market. The UK's economic instability is also leading to rising unemployment rates, especially among younger generations. Graduates are entering a job market with fewer opportunities, and many are facing underemployment in low-paying, part-time roles. The lack of economic opportunities leads to disillusionment and frustration, especially when people see their futures threatened by financial uncertainty. This economic fragility is not just a temporary phase but a warning sign that the UK must urgently reassess its economic policies if it hopes to avoid a full-scale collapse. The UK's future is at a critical crossroads, And the challenges it faces are no longer just headlines. They are realities that affect millions of lives every day. The economic instability, marked by rising inflation and mounting national debt, is a ticking time bomb. The energy crisis, compounded by dependency on external sources, threatens to plunge the nation into darkness both literally and figuratively. Meanwhile, social inequality continues to widen the gap between the rich and the poor, creating a society that is increasingly divided and fragile. The UK's education system is deteriorating, leaving future generations ill-prepared to tackle the challenges ahead. The healthcare system is under siege, with overstretched staff and record waiting times, while the housing market continues to spiral out of control, leaving countless people without stable living conditions. As political polarization grows and public trust in institutions evaporates, it becomes clearer that the UK is struggling to maintain its unity. At the same time, Brexit has left lasting scars, pushing the country further into isolation, while the environmental risks posed by climate change threaten to cause irreversible damage. The urgency of these issues cannot be overstated, as the UK's survival depends on its ability to confront these crises head-on, with courage, collaboration, and forward-thinking policies. With all these factors converging, it's clear that the UK is closer to collapse than you've been told. The time for complacency is over. Change is necessary, but it won't come easily. The next steps we take will determine the nation's future stability. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your opinion. And if you want to understand more about how these crises are unfolding, check out our previous video. We put a lot of effort into making these videos, so if you find value, please support us by subscribing. It's just one click.